There's a question I've found myself coming back to again and again, and maybe it's one you've wrestled with too. Why is it that saying no to someone we love can feel so much harder than saying yes to something that slowly drains us? We tell ourselves we're being kind. We tell ourselves we're keeping the peace. We tell ourselves that love means making room even when there isn't any room left. But over time, something quiet begins to happen. Resentment slips in where honesty should have been. Exhaustion takes the place of connection, and the relationship we were trying so hard to protect begins to carry the weight of everything we never said. One of the things my work has taught me is that the strongest relationships aren't built by people who never disappoint each other. They're built by people who are willing to be honest enough to risk disappointment in order to preserve trust. That's uncomfortable. It's vulnerable. But here's the truth I've learned. The hardest boundaries are rarely acts of rejection. More often, they're the clearest expression of love we have to offer. Because love without honesty doesn't deepen a relationship. It slowly asks one person to disappear so the other person can stay comfortable. And that has never been a recipe for real connection. The boundaries we resist are often the ones our relationships need most. I think one of the greatest misunderstandings we've inherited about love is the belief that if someone matters enough to us, our own needs should naturally move to the background. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that being loving meant being endlessly available, that being generous meant never disappointing anyone, that if someone was hurt by our boundary, then the boundary itself must have been wrong. But the more I've listened to people's stories, and the more I've looked at what creates lasting connection, the more convinced I've become that this simply isn't true. The boundaries we avoid are usually the ones that ask us to tolerate discomfort. They ask us to risk being misunderstood. They ask us to hear someone say, "I wish you would do more," and still answer with honesty instead of guilt. And that's incredibly hard because most of us aren't afraid of setting boundaries. We're afraid of what might happen after we set them. We're afraid someone won't like us anymore. We're afraid they'll think we're selfish. We're afraid we'll disappoint people we've spent years trying to keep happy. So instead of saying what we actually need, we stay quiet. We stretch ourselves a little further. We convince ourselves that we'll rest later, speak later, ask later. And little by little, we start making promises our hearts never agreed to keep. The irony is that we often do this because we care so deeply about the relationship. We don't want conflict. We don't want distance. We don't want anyone to question our love. But avoiding a boundary doesn't protect connection. It simply postpones an honest conversation until it arrives carrying frustration instead of clarity. One of the things we know from relationship research is that trust isn't built by perfection. It's built through consistency. People feel safe when they know they can rely on our words matching our actions. When we repeatedly say yes while internally meaning no, that consistency begins to disappear. We may still look dependable from the outside, but inside we're becoming exhausted, resentful, and emotionally unavailable. That's not because we're bad people. It's because we've been trying to give away something that was never ours to give without limits. Healthy boundaries don't reduce love. They give love a place to breathe. They allow generosity to become a choice instead of an obligation. They make kindness sustainable instead of performative. And perhaps most importantly, they allow us to show up fully present instead of quietly keeping score of everything we've sacrificed. I found that the people with the healthiest relationships aren't the ones who never disappoint each other. They're the ones who trust that one difficult conversation is far less damaging than years of silent resentment. They understand that saying, "I can't do that," or "that doesn't work for me," isn't closing the door on love. It's opening the door to a relationship where both people get to be honest. Because the truth is, love doesn't ask us to disappear. Love asks us to stay present. And sometimes the bravest way to stay present is to tell the truth about where our limits are. That's not selfish. That's the kind of honesty that gives a relationship the chance to become stronger instead of simply becoming heavier. Every time we avoid a boundary, we ask resentment to speak for us. Here's something I wish more of us understood. Resentment doesn't usually arrive all at once. It doesn't walk into our lives with a loud announcement saying, "I'm here because you haven't been honest." It's much quieter than that. It builds in the small moments. It grows every time we agree to something we don't have the capacity for. every time we smile when we actually need to speak. Every time we convince ourselves that keeping someone else comfortable is more important than telling the truth about what's happening inside us. And what's fascinating is that our emotions don't simply disappear because we ignore them. We can push them aside for a while. We can distract ourselves. We can tell ourselves we're being the bigger person. But emotions have a remarkable way of asking to be acknowledged. And if we don't give them a healthy voice, they'll eventually find an unhealthy one. I've seen this happen over and over again. Someone says, "I'm fine," for weeks, maybe even months. They keep showing up. They keep giving. They keep saying yes. Then one seemingly insignificant moment happens, and suddenly everything spills out. To the other person, it feels completely unexpected. But the truth is, it didn't come from that one conversation. It came from every conversation that never happened. Psychologists have long understood that suppressing emotions doesn't eliminate them. In fact, it often increases emotional stress and makes those feelings more likely to surface indirectly. Instead of expressing disappointment honestly, we become sarcastic. Instead of saying we're overwhelmed, we become impatient. Instead of admitting we're hurt, we withdraw. The emotion still comes out. It just comes out wearing a disguise. And here's where it gets heartbreaking. The resentment we carry often ends up hurting the very relationship we were trying so hard to protect. We tell ourselves we're sacrificing for love, but what we're actually doing is asking the relationship to carry the weight of our silence. That's a burden no relationship can carry forever. I think resentment is often misunderstood as anger toward another person. But many times, resentment is grief. It's the quiet sadness of realizing we've abandoned ourselves over and over again. It's the pain of recognizing that we've been expecting other people to notice needs we never had the courage to express. That's not because we're weak. It's because many of us were never taught that honesty could exist alongside kindness. The invitation then isn't to become harsh or rigid. It's not about suddenly saying no to everything. It's about replacing silent expectations with clear communication. It's about trusting that people deserve the chance to respond to the truth instead of asking them to guess what we're feeling. When we say, "I don't have the capacity for that right now," or "I need a little more support," we give the relationship an opportunity to grow. We replace assumptions with understanding. We replace hidden frustration with honest conversation. And something remarkable happens. The energy we once spent managing resentment becomes available for genuine connection. Because relationships don't fall apart simply because difficult conversations happen. More often, they begin to weaken when difficult conversations never happen at all. And every boundary spoken with clarity today is one less resentment waiting quietly for tomorrow. Discomfort is temporary, but silent sacrifice can last for years. If we're honest, most of us don't avoid boundaries because we don't know what they are. We avoid them because we know exactly what they might cost us in the moment. A difficult conversation, an awkward silence, a disappointed look on someone's face, maybe even the fear that someone we care about will think differently about us. And if you've spent a lifetime believing that your worth is tied to keeping everyone else happy, that moment of discomfort can feel almost unbearable. But I've learned that there is an important question hiding underneath every boundary we hesitate to set. It's this: which kind of discomfort am I choosing? Because the truth is, there's no path that allows us to avoid discomfort altogether. We either experience the brief discomfort of telling the truth, or we carry the much heavier discomfort of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The challenge is that those two kinds of discomfort don't feel the same. Honest conversations are immediate. We feel our heart race. We rehearse the words over and over in our minds. We worry about how they'll respond. It's uncomfortable because vulnerability always asks us to step into uncertainty. We don't control the outcome. We simply control whether we're willing to show up with honesty. Silent sacrifice works differently. It doesn't ask for courage today. It simply asks for a little more tomorrow, and then a little more the day after that. At first, it almost feels easier. We tell ourselves it's not a big deal. We can handle it. We don't want to make things complicated. But over months and sometimes years, those quiet sacrifices begin to reshape us. We become more tired than we realize, less patient than we used to be, less joyful. We start feeling like strangers inside relationships where we once felt completely seen. One of the things relationship experts consistently find is that healthy relationships aren't defined by the absence of conflict. They're defined by the ability to repair, communicate, and navigate difficult moments together. Conflict isn't the enemy, avoidance is. When we treat every uncomfortable conversation as something to escape, we also escape the opportunity to build deeper trust. I've noticed that people often imagine boundaries as something that creates distance, but in healthy relationships, the opposite is usually true. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity removes the confusion that so often damages connection. When people know where we stand, they don't have to guess. They don't have to interpret mixed signals or wonder why we're becoming distant. They get the gift of knowing the real us instead of the version that's quietly trying to earn love through constant self-sacrifice. And I know that isn't easy. There are moments when your voice shakes. There are moments when you question yourself after you've spoken. You might even replay the conversation in your head, wondering if you were too much or not enough. That's part of being human. Vulnerability has never promised comfort. It has only ever promised that living honestly is worth the risk. What I've come to believe is that courage isn't measured by how fearless we are. It's measured by our willingness to experience a few minutes of discomfort in service of years of healthier connection. That's a trade worth making every single time. Because the conversations we avoid today don't disappear. They simply wait for another day, carrying more pain than they ever needed to. And choosing temporary discomfort now is often the most loving way to protect a relationship from lasting wounds later. Clear boundaries. Build psychological safety, not emotional distance. I think one of the biggest fears people have about setting boundaries is this quiet belief that honesty will push people away. We imagine that if we finally tell someone what we need, what we can no longer carry, or what isn't working for us, the relationship will somehow become colder, less connected, less loving. It's a fear that makes sense because so many of us grew up believing that acceptance depended on being agreeable. We learned to measure closeness by how little conflict existed, not by how much truth the relationship could actually hold. But here's what I found. Real closeness has never been built on guessing. It's built on clarity. When we leave people to interpret our silence, they usually fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. They don't know we're overwhelmed. They don't know we're feeling stretched too thin. They don't know that our smile is hiding exhaustion or that our patience is slowly running out. They're responding to the version of us we've presented, not the reality we're living. And over time, that gap between what we're feeling and what we're expressing becomes a lonely place. Psychological safety is a phrase we hear often, but at its heart, it's beautifully simple. It means creating relationships where people can tell the truth without living in constant fear of rejection or punishment. That kind of safety doesn't happen because everyone agrees all the time. It happens because everyone knows honesty is welcome, even when it's uncomfortable. I have learned that one of the most generous things we can offer another person is clarity. Saying, I need some time to recharge, is kinder than disappearing without explanation. Saying, I'm not able to commit to that, is more respectful than agreeing and quietly hoping they'll forget. Saying, that hurt me, creates far more opportunity for healing than pretending it didn't matter while allowing the hurt to grow. Research on healthy relationships consistently points to the importance of predictability and trust. We feel safest with people whose words and actions align. When someone communicates clearly, even if the answer isn't the one we hoped for, we know where we stand. There's something deeply calming about that. Uncertainty drains us far more than honesty ever could. I think that's why boundaries, when they're expressed with kindness and respect, don't create emotional distance. They actually remove the invisible barriers that silence has been building all along. They replace confusion with understanding. They replace assumptions with conversations. They make it possible for two people to meet each other honestly instead of performing versions of themselves they think the other person wants. And here's something I've had to remind myself more than once. Not everyone will immediately celebrate your boundaries. Some people have grown comfortable benefiting from your lack of them. Some people may need time to adjust. That doesn't automatically mean you've done something wrong. Sometimes what feels unfamiliar to another person is simply evidence that the relationship is learning a healthier way to function. The goal isn't to build relationships where nobody is ever disappointed. That's impossible. The goal is to build relationships where disappointment doesn't require dishonesty, where differences don't threaten belonging, and where both people trust that the truth is safer than pretending. Because the strongest relationships aren't the ones where people never have difficult conversations. They're the ones where honesty becomes an invitation instead of a threat. And when clear boundaries make that kind of honesty possible, they don't separate hearts. They give those hearts a stronger, steadier place to meet. The greatest act of love is allowing a relationship to be honest enough to survive reality. I think if there's one thing I hope you carry with you, it's this. Love was never meant to require the disappearance of the people inside it. Somewhere along the way, many of us started believing that the strongest relationships were the ones where someone always gave in, always adapted, always carried a little more than they could hold. We confused self-sacrifice with devotion. We confused silence with patience. We confused keeping everyone happy with keeping a relationship healthy. But relationships aren't strengthened by pretending that we're limitless. They're strengthened when two imperfect people decide that honesty matters more than appearances. I've spent years listening to stories about courage, connection, trust, and belonging. And one pattern continues to emerge. The people who build relationships that last aren't the people who avoid difficult conversations. They're the people who understand that love becomes stronger every time it's trusted with the truth. Not because the truth is always easy to hear, but because it's the only place where genuine connection can grow. Think about the people in your life who make you feel safest. Chances are it isn't because they always tell you what you want to hear. It's because you know they're real with you. Their yes means yes. Their no means no. Their kindness isn't dependent on pretending. Their presence isn't built on performance. There's an incredible freedom in relationships where no one has to guess where they stand. And that's what boundaries make possible. They remove the pressure to earn love by overextending ourselves. They remind us that we don't have to choose between being compassionate and being honest. In fact, the healthiest compassion always includes honesty. Without it, compassion slowly turns into obligation. And obligation has a way of draining the joy from even our closest relationships. I also think it's important to remember that boundaries aren't only a gift we give ourselves. They're a gift we give the people we love. When we communicate clearly, we're inviting others into a relationship built on reality instead of assumptions. We're saying, I trust you enough to let you know who I really am. That's an act of courage, and courage has always been contagious. When one person begins telling the truth with kindness, it often gives everyone else permission to do the same. Now, does that guarantee every relationship will last? No. Sometimes honesty reveals that a relationship can only exist if one person keeps abandoning themselves. And while that's painful to discover, it's also incredibly freeing, because relationships that depend on the absence of boundaries aren't asking for love. They're asking for self-erasure. Real love has never required that. The relationships worth protecting are resilient enough to hold honest conversations. They're flexible enough to adapt. They're secure enough to survive disappointment. And when they can't, that truth is valuable too. It tells us that what was being preserved wasn't genuine connection. It was comfort built on silence. So as you leave here today, I want to invite you to think differently about the boundaries you've been afraid to set. Maybe they aren't walls you've been building against the people you love. Maybe they're doors you've been opening toward a more honest, more respectful, and more wholehearted way of loving. Because in the end, the hardest boundaries are rarely the opposite of love. More often than not, they are love in its bravest form.